infectious diseases, research, medicine, health. Welcome to Outbreak News Interviews. And now, broadcasting from the Outbreak News Skylar Studios in beautiful West Central Florida, here is your host, microbiologist and editor of OutbreakNewsToday.com, Robert Harriman.
Well, hey everybody, this is Robert, and welcome to today's show. Well, news of North Carolina's largest chickenpox outbreak since the vaccine was available 23 years ago was reported in Asheville at a school there, and it grabbed a lot of attention recently. Now, closer to home, there was a chickenpox outbreak that was reported in Polk County, Florida, in a school also, and about a half a dozen children were infected. The common denominator among these cases was the children were not vaccinated. Well, joining me to talk about chickenpox and why we're still having these outbreaks is Amesh Adalja, MD. Dr. Adalja is a senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security and an infectious disease expert. Dr. Adalja, thanks for talking to me this evening.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, the Asheville school outbreak has garnered a lot of media attention, and for good reason. Dr. Adalja, you call the school a viral exchange center in a recent piece in The Hill. What do you know about this outbreak?
We know that this outbreak is really being driven by an inordinate amount of religious exemptions to vaccination. This particular school has approximately 75% of its children not vaccinated against chickenpox. So it's not surprising that this highly contagious disease emerged there and has now infected over 36 children. This was completely preventable and predictable. And when you're attending a school that has that low of a vaccination rates, you can anticipate it being more of a viral exchange center than actually a learning center.
Yeah. Now, I would venture to guess that most people know something about this infection, but can you do a short primer on chickenpox, like how it's transmitted, some of the symptoms, and what a lot of people don't realize are some of the complications?
Chickenpox is an infectious disease that was very common in the pre-vaccine era, and it was known characteristically by the vesicular rash. The rash was kind of the blisters that people got, and it is transmitted through the airborne route, which makes it very contagious. It's very hard to stop an infectious disease that's spread through the air. And for the majority of cases, they were mild. Maybe you had to take 5 to 6 days off of school, but in a minority of cases, there were severe complications. So, for example, chickenpox is a cause of stroke. It is a cause of pneumonia, and we had over 100 deaths per year in the United States pre-vaccine, and there were thousands of people that were hospitalized every year from chickenpox. So it wasn't always benign, but it was something that was kind of a fact of life until the vaccine appeared in 1995.
Yeah, and then there's, of course, the benefit of herd immunity that's really lost in a case like this.
Right. When you have that low vaccination rate against the disease in a school where people are coming into it, and you have a disease that's not completely eradicated, you can expect that you're going to see outbreaks. And I think when you look at this school, it really has to be thought of as kind of a tinderbox for an infectious disease outbreak. It's really just left the population so vulnerable at that school that it wasn't surprising that you would see such an outbreak with such force occur.
Right. And, many people say that chickenpox is really no big deal. I get these comments on my Facebook page all the time. However, that's really not quite true. As you mentioned, there are some serious complications. And before the vaccine in 1995, there were 150 deaths a year. And it brings me to a story. A couple of weeks ago, I was doing a presentation for a Great American Teach-In, and one of the students were talking about a chickenpox party in their neighborhood. Not such a good idea, huh?
No, I don't think it's a good idea. It really is Russian roulette. And while most patients are not going to have a severe case of chickenpox, you can't guarantee that you're not, or that you might not spread it to somebody that's at high risk for severe chickenpox. So I don't understand, even in the pre-vaccine era, why people wanted to have chickenpox parties, because in general, it's better not to have chickenpox than to have it. So I don't think it's something that should have been celebrated or really made sense to me. And doing it now in the era of the vaccine really is just basically sacrificing your children in some kind of odd ritual to this virus. And you have to also remember, we talked about some of the severe complications, but remember that shingles is also a late-term complication of chickenpox, and shingles can be debilitating, and it is a very troublesome disease, especially when it causes post-herpetic neuralgia, which can be really something that people are unable to cope with, the pain that happens in the aftermath of shingles. And you can't get shingles if you can only get shingles if you've had chickenpox before. So I think that's another important point when you think about chickenpox not being severe.
Right. And reason and science versus the primitive. You've used this term on this show a number of times, whether we were talking about anti-vaxxers, raw water or raw milk. Can you explain to the listener what you mean by that?
When you think about vaccines, you really have to look at them as the product of reason, of science, of logic, of really deliberate thought to try and tame what was an insoluble human problem using the mind that all humans have. And these are really technological marvels on a scale that's even greater than an iPhone or an airplane to me. And when you see people shun that for getting the infections naturally, or because they believe some pseudoscientific studies that show these side effects that have been debunked, it really is something that I find hard to fathom. And to me, it's turning away your mind from all of that science and rationality that led to these vaccines. And in a way, it's similar to what primitive tribes did when they would shun technology. And I think that's what you have to look at this as. This is something that really is an anti-technology movement. And that's how I see the anti-vaccine movement, the same as the hunter-gatherers who shunned farmers because farmers were a technological advance. And that's what the anti-vaccine movement represents to me.
Right. And seeing these chickenpox outbreaks now, just, on the footsteps of mumps and measles and all these other outbreaks, no big surprise, right?
No, we're seeing the anti-vaccine movement make strides all over the world. We have massive outbreaks of measles in Europe, for example. So we're going to see this until people get serious and start thinking about how valuable vaccines are and really want to tackle these infectious disease issues. And it's actually sad because the United States has easy accessibility to all of these vaccines. There isn't this kind of burden that you might see in the developing world. Anybody can get vaccinated against chickenpox or measles or mumps, but yet they choose not to. And I think that really is a paradox that in the developing world, people line up overnight to get a vaccine. But here we have celebrities telling people not to get vaccines. It's really troubling and paradoxical and backwards in my mind.
Okay. Lastly, any final thoughts on this troubling topic?
Hopefully this will get people's attention because it is getting national headlines, rightly so, because it really is a horrible occurrence that could have been totally prevented and was completely predictable. So maybe just like the measles outbreak in Disneyland in 2014 galvanized people to increase vaccination rates, hopefully this chickenpox outbreak in North Carolina will get people to get more serious about vaccinating their children against these preventable diseases.
Very good. Well, thanks again, Dr. Amesh Adalja, for your time and your expertise, sir. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.